In today's CIE A Level Economics video, we'll be covering the price system and the microeconomy, specifically 7.5.3, the long-run production function, which includes no fixed factors of production and returns to scale, 7.5.4, the long-run cost function, which includes the explanation of the shape of the long-run average cost curve and the concept of minimum efficient scale, and 7.5.5, the relationship between economies of scale and decreasing average costs. Let's get started with the long-run production function. It is the maximum output a firm can produce when all factors of production are variable. Its key features include no fixed factors of production, which means that in the long run, all factors are variable and can be adjusted, and there are no fixed inputs, as well as firms can reduce or expand the scale of operations. Now let's look at returns to scale. This shows how output changes when all inputs are increased proportionally. Increasing returns to scale occurs when a proportional increase in all inputs leads to a greater, more than proportional increase in output. Constant returns to scale occurs when increasing the percentage of inputs results in the same percentage increase of outputs, whereas decreasing returns to scale occurs when increasing all inputs by a certain factor, like land or capital, leads to a proportionally smaller increase in output. Now let's take a look at the long-run cost function and its explanation of the shape of the long-run average cost curve. The long-run average cost curve shows the lowest possible average cost of producing each level of output when all factors of production are variable. It's typically U-shaped due to economies and diseconomies of scale. The downward slope occurs due to economies of scale. This is because average cost falls as output increases due to cost advantages from increasing the scale of production. At the flat bottom of the curve, constant returns to scale occurs, as it's a minimum point on the LRAC curve, the minimum efficient scale, which we'll get to it later throughout this video. At this point, increasing output does not change average cost and the firm is operating at its optimal scale, so it's fully efficient. Now, the upward slope is caused by diseconomies of scale. At this point of the curve, average costs rise as output increases due to inefficiencies when managing a large operation. Over here, I put the graph for the long-run average cost curve. Feel free to pause this video and put this graph in your notes. Let's take a look at the concept of minimum efficient scale. The minimum efficient scale is the smallest level of output at which a firm can exploit its economies of scale and achieve their lowest average total cost. This is when economies of scale has been exhausted and constant returns begin. Achieving minimum efficient scale would minimize the long-run average total cost for a firm. Now let's take a look at the relationship between economies of scale and decreasing average costs. As we said in previous videos, economies of scale is a cost advantages a firm experiences when it increases the scale of production, which leads to a fall in the long-run average cost. There are different types of economies of scale that causes a decrease in average costs, and it includes managerial, which is when specialized managers increase productivity, which leads to more output and a decrease in average costs. Purchasing, which is when firms bulk buy for cheaper, and that lowers the cost per input. Technical, which is when a firm advances their machinery, and that leads to more efficient production, therefore lower cost per unit. Marketing, which is when you spread advertising over more units. And financial, which is when larger firms get lower interest loans, which reduces their capital cost. Now let's take a look at this multiple choice past paper question. The diagram shows a long-run average cost curve for a firm. Which combination of movements correctly describes each type of economy or diseconomy of scale? I'm going to give you guys 1 minute to answer this question. The correct answer is C, and this is because the movement from X to Y shows internal economies of scale, since the cost per unit falls as output increases, which is a movement along the curve. The movement from W to Z shows internal diseconomies of scale because it reflects the cost rising as output increases, whereas the shift from W to Y shows external economies of scale because moving from one point of a long run average cost curve to a lower cost curve shows the firm is operating more efficiently due to outside factors. Let's take a look at another past paper question. The diagram shows the long run average cost curve for a firm and three short run average cost curves. Which statement is correct? A. When the minimum point of SRAC3 is lower than the minimum point of SRAC2, it reflects the law of variable proportions. B. The law of diminishing returns explains why each of the short run average cost curves are U-shaped. C. The position of the short run average cost curve 2 shows the minimum efficient scale of production. Or D. The rising section of the short run average cost curve 1 indicates the existence of diseconomies of scale. I'm going to give you guys another minute to answer this question. The correct answer for this question is B. This is because in the short run, the shape of each short run average curve is determined by the law of diminishing returns. As more units of a variable input are added to fixed inputs, the firm initially experiences increasing efficiency, causing average cost to fall. However, after a certain point, adding more of the variable input leads to lower marginal productivity, which causes average costs to rise. This explains why the short-run average curves are U-shaped. Now let's take a look at another past paper question. Diagrams 1 and 2 show different long-run average cost curves. Which situations do the two diagrams show? I'm going to give you guys another minute to answer this question. The correct answer is D. This is because in the long run, all inputs are variable. The long run average cost curve reflects changes in unit cost as output increases. In the first diagram, the long run average cost curve slopes downwards, which means unit cost falls as output increases due to economies of scale. Whereas in the second diagram, the long run average cost curve slopes upwards, which means unit costs rise as output increases, which reflects diseconomies of scale. D describes both those situations. That's it for today's video. Good luck on your exams, and don't forget to subscribe and check out our other social media platforms.